Okay, now we're going to turn the page so we can continue our notes. So now I am working on page 48, and I'm going to be working at the top of this page because we have to move on to our next type of cell. So on page 48, we are going to be talking about not prokaryotes, but something called eukaryotes. And unlike your prokaryotes, eukaryotes have membrane-bound organelles. The most important of which is the nucleus. And that's the one that most people will point to when they're asking you, oh, how do you know if it's a prokaryote or a eukaryote? And you're going to say, oh, well, you're going to look for whether or not it has a nucleus. Eukaryotes can be unicellular or multicellular. So you can have things like dogs and cats that are made up of many, many, many cells, or you can have things like algae, some funguses that are single-celled. Those are unicellular things. And the first example that we're going to talk about is a plant cell. And for this, you're going to need, there's that sheet that you picked up that has two cells, and one of them is this square one. Go ahead and cut those apart so that you have this square one. That's the one that is our plant cell, and I'm going to tape it down. I still only have my double stick tape, so I'm just going to tape the corners, but you're going to tape it all the way down just like we did for our bacteria cell. And I'm going to tape it so that this circle is kind of pointing up. It's in that upper left-hand corner. All right, let's label this thing. So first we're going to start with that weird circle thing. And that is the nucleus. And the whole job of the nucleus is that it contains DNA. So it stores the DNA. Now, unlike bacterial DNA, our chromosomal DNA is in lines. So I'm going to draw some chromosomal DNA. And it just kind of floats around. But it's in lines. It's not in that circular single chromosome. We have multiple chromosomes and they are in lines. The next thing that I'm going to label is this dot. What is this dot? It is a ribosome. So because I've already explained what a ribosome does, I'm not going to put that on here. I'm just going to leave the label. Okay, the next thing that we have is this outer edge. The outer edge is the cell wall. Now, just like bacteria, plant cells have a cell wall. It has the same job, so it's going to provide for structure and support, but in plants, the cell wall is made of cellulose. And cellulose is a biomolecule that is a carbohydrate. It's a whole bunch of glucose molecules stuck together in long lines, and it's the cellulose that makes celery crunchy, or really makes any plant cell crunchy. All right, inside of the cell wall, plants have a cell membrane because all things have a cell membrane. And in this one, I drew the cell membrane a little bit away from the cell wall. And the reason that I did that is because this cell membrane can actually kind of scrunch up inside. So if the plant doesn't get enough water, that cell membrane can kind of shrink, but the cell wall stays rigid, and that allows the cell to stay upright for longer, even if it's not getting enough water. Now, obviously, if it doesn't get enough water for a long enough period of time, it will actually start to wilt. And that's when it has been deprived of water for so long that this has shrunk all the way up. And then the cell wall has nothing pushing against it, and so it actually starts to bend, which is what plants wilting is. Okay, the next thing that I'm going to label is this weird thing. It doesn't really have anything noticeable about it, and it is a circular thing that in plants is green. It is the chloroplast. And the chloroplast has a very specific plant job. It performs photosynthesis. So unlike animals, plants don't have to eat. They're able to make their own glucose, and they make glucose through the process of photosynthesis, and that happens inside of chloroplasts. Now, weird fact, excuse me. Chloroplasts have two membranes, and they actually have their own DNA. And we think that what happened was there was a chloroplast that was actually really like a bacteria. And it developed through evolution the ability to do photosynthesis. And along came a bigger bacteria, a bigger prokaryote, and it basically ate the chloroplast. And when it took the chloroplast inside, it didn't damage the chloroplast. Instead, the chloroplast continues to live inside of this bigger cell, performing photosynthesis, and then the cell basically takes the glucose from the chloroplast and can use it for itself. So any cells that were able to absorb chloroplasts were able to outperform. They were able to survive better than those cells that didn't. And those plant cells, they got this ability of photosynthesis, and now all plant cells can do photosynthesis. All right, next we have this weird thing with a squiggly line, and this thing is a mitochondria. And a lot of high school students have heard of a mitochondria before. They know that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. But what does that really mean? Well, a powerhouse provides energy, like our powerhouses provide electricity, which is a type of energy, to our houses. And so the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell because it provides energy for the cell. And we all know that cells get energy by doing cellular respiration. Yes, so the mitochondria performs cellular respiration. Now, just like chloroplasts, mitochondria has their own DNA, and they have their own two membrane setup. So they have two membranes around the outside, and that is also a cell that we think once could exist by itself and then was taken in by a plant. And because it gave the plant the ability to get energy more easily, that plant was able to survive and reproduce and was able to outcompete the other plants. And now mitochondria basically live inside of plant cells. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a star, well, it's not a star, it's a plus. We already did a star, so I'm going to add a plus to the things that we've talked about that are those membrane-bound organelles. So I've got my nucleus. Oh my goodness, I didn't realize you couldn't even see this. So I've got my nucleus, I've got my chloroplasts, I've got my mitochondria, and these are our membrane-bound organelles. So I'm going to add a note down here. I guess I'll check this time and make sure that you can actually see it. These are our membrane-bound organelles. So these are the things that make this a eukaryote and not a prokaryote. Oh, and I guess I didn't mention to you, the reason that these are called eukaryotes is eu means true. Karyo still refers to the egg. So these are cells that look like a true egg. All right, back to our diagram here. So we've got our mitochondria, we've got our chloroplast, we've got our nucleus. Those are our membrane-bound organelles. There's one more membrane-bound organelle, and that's this big sac. And it's in sort of the middle of this cell. So I'm going to draw an arrow. And this is called a vacuole. And the vacuole is a membrane-bound sac. And I'm going to add an S here because it could be sacs, plural. And the job of this membrane-bound sac is that it stores water and minerals. And plant cells have a really big vacuole. And the vacuole is membrane-bound, so we're going to give it one of those plus symbols. And then there's just one more thing that we need in here. It's one of those things that all cells have. So what is this? It is the cytoplasm. And that's it. Those are the things that make up our plant cell.